mental workers, you're listening to the Mental Work Podcast, the podcast about working in mental health for early career mental health workers. As always, I'm your host, Bronwyn Milkins, and today we are talking about approaches to working with trauma, specifically EMDR therapy and trauma-focused CBT. You might be feeling unsure of how to approach trauma work, and that's incredibly common for early career mental health workers. In this episode, we're going to break down 2 evidence-based trauma approaches to help you understand what they actually look like in practice and how to figure out which might be the right fit for you and your clients. Here to help us out with this topic is our guest today, Chris Long. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
It's so lovely to have you here. Thanks for coming on. Could you please start us off by telling listeners who you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Chris. I'm a registered psychologist in Sydney. I live in Surrey Hills, so if anyone knows where that is, right in the centre of the city, basically. I've been a registered psych for about 4 years now, I think. Yeah, did my provisional, started that about 2019, I think. I'm 37 years old, so I was a professional musician before I was a psychologist. And I found a lot of my musician buddies have become psychs and therapists and stuff, actually, which is kind of a bit of a weird kindred spirit thing going on, I think. I do a lot of trauma work. So yeah, EMDR, trauma-focused CBT, but also over the last couple of years, really getting into schema therapy as well. So I think that influences my approach, even if that's not specifically what I'm doing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you're definitely not going to get away with saying that you moved from being a professional musician to psychology. So what prompted that change?
I went to therapy myself for some personal stuff, and then I just really kind of enjoyed it. I was already quite interested in it. Had a few friends where, maybe some of them had been, and we would talk about psychological stuff. And then was just getting a bit over, doing gigs and spending all weekend working and sort of having the opposite timetable to a lot of my friends. Wanted a bit more security, so yeah, just wanted to try something new, and I gave psychology a go and loved it.
So why do you think your mates have also gone to psychology? What is it about musicianship that translates into psychology?
Yeah, a few of us have had this discussion. We've tried to figure it out. Don't know if we've solved it, but maybe there's kind of a curiosity that, if we're going to be psychological about it, maybe that openness to experience kind of thing is a bit higher. Creativity, maybe. Curiosity about that.
Interesting trend. Could be a thesis for a listener out there.
Yeah. Could be. There's probably someone's probably already done it.
I'm sure somebody's done a PhD or something on it already, but it's interesting nonetheless, and happy to have you join the psych field. So how did you come to be interested in working with clients who have experienced trauma? The
place I work at, it's part of the gig. So just kind of, again, just sort of gave it a go because that was part of the job. But I do find it quite fascinating. So we, at my work, we see people through a whole range of different referral sources. So one of them is EAP, but then we do private clients. We do the insurance scheme stuff. So CTP. So often that's car crashes. So CTP stands for compulsory third party, the green slip for your car. So we see people who've been in serious car accidents. Or through workers' comp. There's quite often PTSD through there. So I didn't necessarily choose to get into it initially, but have found it really interesting, and I think learning about trauma really informs the rest of your psychological practice most of the time as well.
Yeah.
Because you learn about avoidance and gradual exposure and, anxiety, all these things that, they can be the little t traumas or the big T,
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a niche that you sought out, but you're happily in that niche.
Yeah. I'm not. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's my niche either. I love couples therapy, and I do a bit of organizational stuff. I supervise people. I do a few different things, but it's one of the things I've been fairly trained up in and had a fair bit of experience in.
Awesome. So the first thing I wanted to unpack was, I guess, the concerns that early career psychs might have around working with clients who have experienced trauma. Is it all right if we unpack a few concerns that listeners may have just to hear your responses to them?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got 3 of them. The first one is, I reckon there are some listeners who are like, I'm scared of making things worse for a client who has trauma by talking about the trauma. What would you say to that listener?
It's a good point. And I think it'd be remiss to say it's not possible, if you go in really heavy-handed or in a non-trauma informed way. It's possible. I think, though, I would also say on the flip side, you'd have to be fairly cavalier or something like that to not pick up on the signs that someone's getting distressed and pull back and just kind of check in with them and say, like, is it okay if you tell me about what happened, or do you want to do that next session? So if you're working with someone who's been traumatized, you generally do need to hear at least a bit about the event or the events, their beliefs about what happened, all that kind of thing, but you don't necessarily need to hear all the gruesome details either. In fact, most people who teach trauma-informed therapies recommend being kind of careful around that and not necessarily going all the way in. So like protecting yourself as much as the client, and watching out for things like vicarious trauma, which is kind of like secondary trauma for those who aren't familiar with that term. But I had one of my EMDR supervisors once said that when she starts off her sessions, so when she's starting off trauma processing sessions through EMDR, she'll say to her client, did anyone die this week? Was there any, did your house burn down or anything like that? And she's like, nope. Okay, great. Let's get into it. So she's kind of like, she doesn't necessarily want to like go way off track or get hung up on things. And she also would say, if someone was going to go right into detail and she didn't need to hear it, she'd just kind of like stop them and be like, hey, you don't need to tell me all the details. Like, I know enough, I think, to get into this with you.
And because them sharing the details as well, they may unintentionally dysregulate themselves too.
Yeah, I think just like I know I've had that experience though, where I have like maybe asked someone questions too fast. Like the first time I saw someone with PTSD, I think I didn't realize how significant it was for this person, and it was a really horrific case of sort of what had happened to this person. So kind of like trial by fire for me. Not that it's about me, but it was quite intense, and I did just ask them quite casually, so what happened? And that really did set them off. So learning curve for me was like, I should have checked the referral a little more closely and probably chatted to a supervisor before I first talked to this client, but that didn't happen.
Thank you for sharing that learning. I'm sure that that's common for a lot of folks who are starting out working with clients who have experienced trauma, is that, we don't realize that these, I guess, quite simple questions can unlock a lot for some clients.
Yeah.
This is related to the next question, which is, what would you say to a listener who is concerned about being emotionally overwhelmed by a client's trauma?
Again, it's a good question. But I would say that's probably coming from a place of anxiety for that, like the therapist or, whoever it is working with the trauma. You're never really going to know until you meet them and you try it and see what happens. The cases that you might think on paper are going to be the most intense and severe and most upsetting for the person and for yourself to deal with. It's not necessarily that straightforward. Like, it's not that linear. Sometimes those people are quite resilient and they've got so much like positive, so many positive beliefs and ways of like processing the trauma or resilience, like whatever you want to call it, that it's actually pretty good working with them. Like, it's quite comfortable. And someone who you might think, like this doesn't seem like it's that severe an event or injury and they're so distressed. So it's not necessarily that straightforward.
I completely agree. And I wonder whether you've had times where you've been surprised how you were emotionally affected. Like maybe there were times when you're like, I should be more emotionally affected by this, but you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't exactly know why that is, right? Like,
yeah, I thought about that as well, because as you were talking, I was reflecting back on a few cases and I was like, there's definitely been times where it's like, say a 10 out of 10 trauma. I'm like, I should probably feel more than I currently feel, but I don't. And then a 1 out of 10 trauma and I'm like, oh, I almost feel like I'm crying. And I think it might be related to like my own life as well. Like if there are things that the 1 out of 10 trauma like reminds me of and connects with current life, like could that be maybe relevant to you as well?
For sure. Yeah. Counter-transference stuff. Yep.
Yes.
Definitely comes up when you're working with trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it relates back to what you were saying that we can't really predict and we might be getting over anxious in ourselves trying to like lessen the emotional load, or we don't actually know what it will be.
Yep.
So final concern that we want to address is, what would you say to a listener who is overwhelmed by the number of trauma approaches available and doesn't know which one to pick?
Great question again. Who are you getting these good questions from?
ChatGPT.
Oh, really? I was like, these insightful listeners of yours. No.
I get ChatGPT to help me out. I do edit the questions, so sometimes they're a bit of me and AI, but it would feel bad to take full credit for them.
Fair enough. What was the question again? Sorry. Too many trauma approaches. Yeah.
There's a lot. There's a lot of trauma approaches. How do you know which one to pick? How do you not feel overwhelmed by the number?
My practical, simple tip would be start with trauma-focused CBT, because as we know with CBT, with so many things, it's like the foundational sort of therapy, or things like ACT and all kinds of things. Schema therapy, like these are built on the principles of CBT. So I would always recommend starting with that. You'll learn about how to educate the client about trauma. You'll learn stabilization strategies, how to acclimatize them to therapy. You'll learn the gradual exposure kind of techniques, which you pretty much need that stuff for any of the trauma therapies. It doesn't matter which one you're going to use. You need it for EMDR. You don't just kind of go straight in with EMDR into the biggest, worst event, or very, very rarely anyway would you do that. And same with schema. Like you wouldn't get someone to do imagery rescripting with something that, was a 10 out of 10 straight away. So yeah, my practical, simple advice would be start with trauma-focused CBT, but start listening to podcasts like this one and all kinds of other ones. Read books, read articles about other approaches, and you'll probably find yourself gravitating naturally towards one or the other, and then try that out too.
I really love your sensible approach here. I think that's really sensible advice. As well, I would add that sometimes if you go off like CBT founded approaches, you might not have as many supervisors available to supervise you in it. I'm thinking of like somatic experiencing, which I know is like quite popular in the US, and it's like a body-based approach that, has a good evidence base, but there's not much training here in Australia, and you just might not have many supervisors who are trained in that to be able to supervise. So I feel like for an early career psych, it's like you're safer with trauma-focused CBT and EMDR.
Yeah, I agree. Because, you do just want to stick with what's practical.
And it's like these kind of body-based approaches, it's like because we're all trained in the CBT-based approaches during like Masters and 5+1, it's like it's just a whole different area of learning. I guess you could just feel quite overwhelmed.
Totally. Yeah. How many trauma? I don't even know how many trauma therapies there are, but
there's a lot,
right?
There's a lot. I literally heard of a new one like a week ago, and I was like, I don't want to know.
Yeah. Stop it.
Yeah, stop. Okay. So I wanted to chat about trauma-focused CBT and EMDR therapy. we're going to do like a really brief overview. So I just want to give like a disclaimer to listeners. If you're thinking this is like everything to do with trauma-focused CBT and EMDR, no, it is not. We're going to do an overview. So can you describe trauma-focused CBT in a nutshell, and then we'll do EMDR?
Sure. I should probably preface this though with like, I'm not at all an expert in these things. This is just, this would be my little spiel.
Spiel good.
And someone else probably does it better. But trauma-focused CBT, I would say, is, well, it's CBT, but adapted to be trauma-informed and to specifically treat and manage trauma, whether that's PTSD or adjustment disorder or little t traumas or something that's just happened, like the kind of acute trauma response. And one of the reasons it's such a nice place to start is because it is really structured and there's lots of skills you can learn. You can, if you're starting out, almost get away with like learning stage by stage as you're doing it. Like you'd want to have a decent idea of where you're going with it, but you could also just sort of learn, be like 1 or 2 steps ahead of where your client's up to, and just kind of walk through the steps. So yeah, how would you describe it? Is that?
No, that's pretty much how I'd describe it as well. It's a structured approach. I know it mainly focuses on stabilization, exposure. I know it's mostly being used with adolescents in particular, like kids and adolescents, like it's a focused approach, but also for adults, it works very well. And I guess like the assumption is that trauma creates negative alterations in how we think about ourselves, other people, and the world around us. And cognitive behavioural therapy is really good at examining those trauma-generated cognitions.
So yeah, like I guess an example would be like, you know, if someone had a car accident or was in a car accident and then they didn't feel safe driving, you might go through the steps of trauma-focused CBT and at some point get to the point of like, you know, you're not necessarily going to argue that or try and convince them that driving is 100% safe, because it's not. But they might have a belief that it's, or feel that it's like terrifying now and not be leaving their like house or ever getting in a car, walking everywhere, even if it takes them hours. And so that could be quite debilitating. And so you might want to help them get to a point where they're taking like reasonable risks. Or, you know, we all know it's dangerous when we get in a car, but we do it because we're like, it's convenient. And, you know, I want to get to the shops and get home in half an hour. Or whatever,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So that's like the exposure part. And I guess like another component is the behavioural experiments. So it's like going along your car accident route. A person who's had a car accident, they may find that their belief is like, if I don't look left and right 10 times, then I'm going to be in a car accident. And you can design an experiment where you test that belief. And it's with behavioural experiments, you're not actually trying to put your client at risk. We're not saying like flout all the road rules and never look.
Close your eyes and walk across the road.
Like, no. But we're going to be like, can we look like once left and right and then go? Yeah.
Something reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like, what's your experience of delivering this therapy? Like, how do you feel doing it? Do you feel like it's a good one?
I think, it's great. Like I said, I think it's really foundational. And even if you're doing other therapies, you're kind of doing trauma-focused CBT, or you're thinking about these principles, especially the gradual exposure principles and challenging avoidance and unhelpful thoughts and beliefs and stuff. So if I go back to the example of working with people who've been in like car accidents, you might start with you'd develop like the gradual exposure hierarchy, right? So you'd sit there with them and try and figure out, okay, well, let's come up with a list of things that you're fearing related to cars and roads and driving and all that kind of thing. And at the top would be something like, you know, going for a long road trip, right? Driving for like 6 hours up the coast or something. But you don't start there, you start near the bottom, and it might be like, go out the front of the house and just hear the road sound. and just sit with that, right? It's so objectively safe, and there's really no like rational sort of reason not to do that other than the anxiety that it might bring up, which makes sense. And by this point you would have gone through the psychoeducation to, you make them feel like this is understandable, it's normal, like your nervous system is reacting to this for a reason, so they don't feel silly about it or anything. Hopefully it then really just becomes about anxiety, like, and reducing that anxiety down, just as you would if someone had a phobia.
Totally. And I find that clients are really receptive to this understanding, like the way we're explaining it. I find that they can get on board with it pretty easily. Is that what you've found as well?
Yeah. I think everyone has some kind of relatable experience of being scared of something. You commonly just end up talking about like public speaking or something, right? Or
Yeah.
That like you got all clammy, right? Your heart was racing, like you were afraid of it. You were worried about what might happen. And did
that's a really
bad
good
happen?
Example, actually, because it's like most of the time when we do public speaking, it's like we're not in danger of somebody like attacking us most of the time. I guess it depends on the setting. But like we'd all be able to understand that maybe Jimmy in grade 5 like threw a pencil at you when you were public speaking, and then your brain is conditioned to react in the same way as if Jimmy's in the audience now.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I find it pretty easy to explain trauma in that way. It's like a conditioned response that your body is doing. Like you don't have much control, but we can help you regain control through exposure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're willing.
If you're willing. Yes. Oh, such a good point. Okay. So I feel like we've given a good overview of trauma-focused CBT, and let's have a go at EMDR therapy.
So in a nutshell, describing EMDR, well, I guess it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is a mouthful, which is why everyone calls it EMDR.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think that it's really about the eye movements. And I mean, that's part of it, but it's really not the core of EMDR. The main theory behind EMDR is the adaptive information processing model, or AIP model, which, you learn about a few of these trauma therapies, and they're all really the same. So it's based on the idea that when something traumatic happens, most of the time we have our acute response to that, but then over time our adaptive beliefs, or if we're using the CBT model, our like helpful thoughts, our good experiences and memories and stuff, slowly help us make sense of that event and integrate it into our worldview or our view of ourselves or whatever. And then that trauma response just kind of naturally over time dissipates and we get back to our baseline or something like that. And what we're trying to do in EMDR, or what the AIP model posits, is that that hasn't happened yet. So we're trying to link or unstick these traumatic experiences, sort of open them up, activate those memory networks through prompts, and then we're trying to link that adaptive information to the traumatic memories and beliefs and stuff and events, to sort of see them in a new way, reprocess those memories, and then because of what we know about memory and the science of memory, once you take a memory out and you sort of modify it, when you like pack it away again, it's now changed, or there's new information stored in there with it. And the eye movements part is really just about I explain it to clients like it's a little bit of a neurobiological kind of hack that we take advantage of. So there's a kind of another theory there that it stimulates the visual cortex, or the occipital part of the brain. It gets a lot of that visual imagery happening, but that it also uses up a lot of your working memory. So it's kind of like you have one foot in the room and what you're doing right now, and that a lot of your working memory is taken up by that, and one foot in the trauma, and that sort of lessens that severity of that experience of the trauma, or it stops people from like dissociating as much, that kind of thing.
You explain that so well.
Well, that's good to hear because it's kind of the gist of how I try and explain it to clients. There's a fair bit to cover with EMDR.
There is. I loved your neurobiological hack. I haven't heard that before, and I'm like, that's genius. That's really good.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I like that. And I like that you're describing it because, like, I don't often feel fear talking on the podcast, but, like, I actually noticed that I feel scared talking about EMDR because I'm like, oh, the EMDR folks are going to, like, crucify me if I say something wrong about it.
Yeah, there's some pretty hardcore EMDR folks out there.
There are.
Don't worry about them.
Yeah. Okay, let's not stress. But I think you did a good job. The other metaphor I like for EMDR is like if you've got a wound and then it's kind of like when the trauma gets stuck, it's like somebody's stuck a stick in the wound and we just need to get that stick out so that it can actually heal over. Yep. So like EMDR is based on like the brain has a natural ability to heal from trauma and something is making it stuck. And so it's a way of getting unstuck.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before.
I'll
stick it in my back pocket.
Was there anything else you wanted to say like about EMDR, about the overview?
I think just that, going back to like some of the trauma-focused CBT principles, like those all come into it. So you don't necessarily you just don't like dive straight into the biggest, most feared memories. You would often start with something really small. In fact, sometimes it's good in EMDR to start with a positive experience. Yeah. So if someone has... We'll keep using this car crash example.
Yep.
If someone had positive experiences as a kid with driving, like maybe they loved dodgem cars or something, I don't know, random. And so you might be like, okay, tell me about a time where you were riding dodgem cars as a kid and like all your friends were there, family, you were having a great time, you remember laughing and wanting to have another go. And so instead of processing a trauma, you're actually strengthening that adaptive information and really taking that out of the box and expanding on it. And then because of what we know about how trauma memory networks work, all of that's going to be kind of sitting adjacent to the traumas. And even if you're not explicitly talking about the trauma, like it's going to start to get into similar territory, I guess.
Yeah. It's really interesting hearing you say that. And it's like, I've never made this connection before, but it's like with the trauma-focused CBT, it wants you to gather adaptive information through the exposure and the experimentation. So it's like go out to your letterbox and just listen to the traffic. And trauma-focused CBT wants you to be able to integrate that information you gain from your reality. Whereas EMDR is like, that's not quite enough. And the mechanism is the bilateral stimulation. It's like, no, we can get this adaptive information by making it more accessible and enriching it, like with the positive ones, and then getting it in your brain that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of the important things I learned about EMDR when I got more into it was that it only really works if people have adaptive information. And
true.
If they don't, so if you're working with, say, someone who has, complex PTSD from, neglect and really difficult childhood experiences, maybe a very unsupportive or absent family, really complex kind of case, then there's not necessarily going to be the same or the typical like adaptive information that would often help people recover from traumas. So, we know that when people develop PTSD, it's not just about the event, it's about their whole life before that event. And people with a lot of adaptive information often don't need therapy because they just recover. They believe the world's inherently good or safe or whatever, and then they just kind of deal with things and don't necessarily need help. But we know that EMDR doesn't necessarily work unless there's that adaptive information, because there's nothing to link the trauma to unstick it and think about it differently. So sometimes in those cases you actually have to help them make adaptive information. So a good way to test that and again, this isn't just with EMDR, but a good way to test that is to see if they can like take a compliment.
Oh.
So yeah, so one of my EMDR supervisors used to do this. She'd just say, tell me something good about yourself. And if they couldn't say it, well then she'd, whatever it was, she'd find something and she'd give them a compliment and say, you're really good at this, or, love that, hairstyle you've got, or whatever. Probably try and make it more personal than that, right? And if they couldn't take that in, if you could tell they couldn't accept that, or that made them anxious or kind of squeamish, then she what was the phrase? There was positive affect phobia. So like scared of feeling good or feeling joy or feeling happiness, because that's a scary emotion. It leaves you vulnerable. So if you can't do that, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to find EMDR kind of standard protocol very helpful. Yeah. Unless you work on that first.
So maybe that's something else to know. I realise that we've left out the fact that EMDR is also a structured approach. So it's not just the reprocessing phase. It's like it's 8 phases that you got. Mm-hmm. And one of those phases, like particularly for folks with complex trauma, is like stabilization and installation of like positive resources. Because folks with complex trauma, any affect can be difficult and dysregulating for them. So as you say, we need to bring up this adaptive stuff or install it if they don't have access to it. So I quite like that EMDR as a structured approach as well. That's actually one of the reasons why I trained in it, because I heard it was very structured.
Yeah. Do you do much of it?
I do. Yeah.
How have you found it?
How have I found it? I will say I found it very difficult. I found that it was a very difficult therapy to learn. I think mainly because, and I wonder if this is your experience as well, when I learned EMDR, there was literally a glossary of terms. And I was like, I've never heard these terms before, like adaptive information processing model, installation of resources, what bilateral stimulation. Like I'd never heard these words before. And it's like I'm talking about them pretty fluently now. But I remember when I started out, I was like, I have no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah. And they start using like the acronyms like immediately.
Yes,
like BI,
and like,
EMs,
and it's like,
the
positive automatic thoughts and the negative cognitions and like NCs, and they'll abbreviate it straight away, and I'm like, stop.
Yeah.
So when I first started out, I literally had the scripts in front of me, and our trainer was pretty cool with that. He was like, just have the scripts in front, clients don't mind, and I found that was the case. How about you?
Yeah, very similar. Like it's quite a jargony therapy, which is a bit annoying and does take a while to get your head around. I think the best way to get around that is to just listen to lots of podcasts. There's actually a podcast called the EMDR podcast. I don't know if you've listened to it.
Yes, yeah.
That's a really good place to start. He talks about all of these concepts. He's got some great metaphors for EMDR. But yeah, it's a steep learning curve, I think, because it is quite different to talk therapy. Yeah, it does have like maybe like similar kind of structured stages that something like trauma-focused CBT would have, but once you get into the actual eye movement and processing part, it's pretty different to talk therapy.
It is pretty different.
You don't do much talking.
No, and in fact, like talking is discouraged. It's like, stop trying to hurry the client along. They can do it themselves most of the time, unless we use the interweaves, another jargony term, which is helping their brain move along with some words that we say. But most of the time, we don't do much.
Right. I've found that to be the case anecdotally, maybe about 50% of the time.
Yeah.
And then I would say a lot of the time, I think the interweaves and stuff are really important. And it is kind of coming back to that idea that if people would have recovered from PTSD, they probably just would have done it if they had the adaptive information. So I personally, I've found that, giving prompts and steering it a little bit more actively is quite helpful. But I know there are, those like hardcore EMDR purists out there who are like, nope, don't do that.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
just your own nonsense getting in the way. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there are purists. I've also found that interways work good. I just feel like I haven't gotten good at them. I feel like that's a skill in itself. And that's what I mean by I feel like it's quite a difficult therapy to master. Because sometimes I'll say something and I'll be like, consider that you were a child. Think about that. Now follow my fingers.
yeah,
And they're like, I don't care that I was a child. I was an idiot. And I'll be like, oh, backfire.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Counterweave.
yeah, exactly. But I feel like it's gotten easier if I've gone along. I don't want any listeners to think that it's an insurmountable therapy. It has gotten easier the more you familiarize yourself, you listen to podcasts, you talk about it. Have you found that too?
Yep. I find that with pretty much all therapies I learn, like same with schema. It was the same with CBT. Like just go and find heaps of different sources of information about it. Hear lots of different people talk about it. Watch whatever videos you can find of people doing it, and that's the best way, I reckon.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about EMDR?
Oh, I feel like I could talk about it forever. I do have one good thing.
Okay.
Another helpful thing I think about EMDR is a metaphor I got from that podcast, the EMDR podcast. So he talks about the boat and the whale metaphor. I don't know if you've heard
I haven't
him
heard of this.
mention that.
I'm excited.
It's good. It really summarizes EMDR really well. So I'm probably going to butcher it a bit, but the metaphor is that you're kind of like when you're doing trauma processing, you're often going after these traumatic memories that are kind of like whales, and your boat is kind of like your adaptive information. And so he says that EMDR was kind of the adaptive information processing model that underpins EMDR was developed really around the idea that for people who have kind of boats the size of cruise ships, I think is the way he describes it. So you go out there, you get a whale on the hook, and it's like, you're fine. That whale can thrash around and you'll be able to deal with it because your boat is huge. It can handle that. But if you go out and you hook a whale and you're in a canoe, what are you going to do? What are you going to do now that you've woken up that whale? And so it's not necessarily just good for EMDR. Again, it's kind of like good for the idea of working with trauma. This is why you want to tread carefully and go slow and really assess the person well before you start doing anything like processing. And if they do have, adaptive information the size of a canoe, that's fine, but you've got to build up that boat. And so you might try just going after a tiny little fish first, the smallest fish you can find. And that's actually where I pretty much always start EMDR if it was a car crash, then I might go with, I don't know, maybe they've got a memory of like when they were a kid and they heard a horn honk and it scared them. Something small like that, or even small, like the smallest you can find, basically. Maybe the first time they were in a car and they felt bump and they were a bit like, what's that? Whatever it is, like the smallest you can find, and then just see how that goes. Because it's kind of like taking that canoe for like a little test drive. And then you come back and you figure out, oh, there's a hole there, so we'll plug that hole up, and suddenly your canoe's a bit stronger. And so, yeah, I just like this metaphor, because then it's like your goal is to really build up the adaptive information and only go after fish that you can actually process.
I really love this metaphor because in my head I'm immediately like, I'll build them up to be a battleship and then they can take on any whale.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not the point of the metaphor. But I really liked it.
No, that's a good one, right? I'm sure there'd be clients who'd be like, yeah, I'm going to get a battleship. Yeah. Like, cool.
Yeah. I'm going to have 12 cannons. Whatever, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah. I really liked that, and that's awesome. I wanted to ask you about trauma-informed approaches. Is that okay?
Yeah.
What do you think works best for working with clients who have experienced trauma, just from your experience and what you know of the literature? What do you find works well? I guess I'm asking for some do's and some don'ts.
One of the important things to think about early on, which I reckon we don't really get taught enough about, is seeking informed consent. And, just because you get a referral and it says on there that someone has PTSD doesn't mean you just dive in and you start doing trauma work. You need to go slow and explain to that person. Well, actually probably start by like checking their understanding of like, do they know what PTSD is? Has anyone gone through this with them? And if they were to come to therapy to work on that, do they know what that would look like? And once they then know and they're informed, is that something they actually want to do, or would they rather not unpack this and keep it locked in that box? Which, if that's their choice, I mean, who are you to say they shouldn't, right? Like, so I think that those informed consent kind of like principles are really important to safely enter. And we know that one of the things that goes out the window quite often when people are traumatized is that sense of control. So if you're just kind of launching into stuff and they don't quite know what they're getting into, that's really not helpful.
That's really important, and I agree that it's something that is essential but could be overlooked. But with the trauma-informed principle of empowerment, choice and control is really important.
Yep. So I think that's one of the main things, and not to underestimate the importance of that early stabilization and education in particular phase. There's a risk that kind of stabilization can go on for too long quite often, and the literature does have a lot of evidence around not necessarily waiting until clients stabilize to do trauma work, because that might not necessarily happen. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg. But you do what you can, and you make sure they're making the choice, not you, to get into the therapy, and then go from there. And then I think I'd probably say just having a good understanding of how anxiety and avoidance turn up when it comes to trauma as well. And you will get people who don't want to talk about things, or who don't want to try these challenging things, and so you might need to get to a point with therapy as well where you hold people accountable to that, and sort of set some, not even boundaries, but just be realistic with them, that like if they don't want to go there, it's fine, they don't have to, but then don't be afraid to then ask, well, what do you want to do? Like, why are you coming to therapy if you don't want to dive into these things? And it might seem like a really nasty, harsh question or something like that, but I think it's something that most experienced psychs are quite comfortable doing, because they've had the experience of treading really lightly around these topics, or feeling like they're just not, you might feel like you're not really getting somewhere with a client, but they don't want to deal with something quite difficult, so you let them not deal with it, but they keep coming to therapy because they like the support, and before you know it, you're like 20 or 30 sessions in and you haven't really gotten anywhere. They just like coming there, and that might be fine for a while, but eventually they actually might get quite frustrated with you and be like, hey, I've spent all this money and I don't feel any better, and I've been using all my time to come here, and what are we doing? Sometimes they flip it back on you. So don't be afraid to have those kind of conversations.
You've named something so important. I consider this like a core dilemma in doing trauma therapy, because the client can be avoiding talking about the trauma or doing the trauma work, and we as a therapist can collude in that avoidance by not bringing it up. So we can be like, oh, but they don't really want to, but it's also that avoidance is a core maintaining and perpetuating factor of the trauma. So we need to be aware of when we're colluding under the guise of saying we're giving them like empowerment and choice. It's a huge dilemma though, and I reckon one that's good to sort out in supervision too, because it's like, is this my feelings, like the countertransference, or is it like an actual thing that's happening? But I've found it pretty good to bring up with clients by being like, hey, I've noticed for the past 3 sessions we've been talking about X, and we did have the goal of doing trauma processing for these 3 sessions. I wonder what happened and what is happening between us. So approaching it with curiosity and openness and non-judgment can be really helpful there.
I agree.
And otherwise, Oh, you go.
No, you go. You go.
Oh, I was going to say,
I've talked
otherwise
enough.
we do get to that situation of like 20 sessions down the track and the client's like, it's your fault.
Yeah. And it can happen. Like, justifiably clients can get annoyed because they're like, what? Nothing's changed, or I feel worse,
Yeah.
And I think the other way I've seen that play out is, I remember, not a specific client, but like this kind of thing happened. So again, like we go the car crash example, right?
Oh, reliable. Yep.
It's very reliable. I remember trying to get someone to do their like gradual exposure hierarchy for weeks and weeks and months, right? And they would just be avoiding it. They, maybe like just dip their toes in and be like, nah. They'd tell me they were going to do it each session, and then they'd come the next time and they still hadn't really done anything. And then I remember sometimes logging in with some of these clients, and then they'd be like sitting in the car on video, and they'd be like sweating, and they'd be like, I've decided we're going to do it today, right?
Oh, okay.
And they're like, and you're like, what do you mean? You were just going to like, walk into the garage and walk back out. That was our next thing on the list, right? And then they're like sitting in the driver's seat with their hands on the wheel, and they're like, doing it today, I'm sick of this kind of thing. And they're kind of like overcompensating, and they're just flooding, they're just overwhelmed, and it's probably going to set them back, if anything, not help their PTSD or anxiety. So I think that can come about if you don't have these conversations about like, where are we at? Is this working for you? I feel like we're not really progressing. If you're not having those conversations, you can get stuck like that.
100%. Chris, it has been so lovely speaking with you today. What do you hope that listeners will take away from our conversation?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe just hopefully a couple of tips, or even one helpful idea. That'd be nice.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there was a lot of great takeaways from what you said. I know that I learned a lot from you today, and I think there are a few things that stood out to me as worthwhile. So I hope listeners find that too.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take the stick in the wound idea from you. I
feel like I butchered that a little bit. Let me just try. I feel like it was like also rubbing dirt in the wound kind of thing, and we just need to get the dirt out. Like, I reckon I made up the stick. Improve upon my metaphor.
It works.
It still works.
It's stopping it from healing, right? It's a great metaphor.
I mean, and like we do this all the time with clients as well. Sometimes I do forget the metaphors I'm creating, and then I make them up on the spot, and I'm like, does that work? And then the client will be like, yeah. And I'm like, cool, got it.
Yeah, love a metaphor.
Yeah. If listeners want to learn more about you or get in touch, where can they find you?
I probably just Google me. I'll come up. But I am actually about to get my board approved supervisor approval. It's sort of just pending. I don't have a criminal record or anything, so it should come through soon. So you might be able to find me that way as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris, again. It's been lovely to speak and learn from you. Listeners, if you found this episode helpful, make sure to follow Mental Work. Share this episode with a mate who might benefit from it. And that's a wrap. Thanks for listening. I'm Bronwyn Milkins. Have a good one and catch you next time. Bye.